Hi, everybody, and welcome to the April Bash. So, first of all, apologies for the short notice. April went in like that, So suddenly the end of the month is upon us, and it's Bash time. So, apologies for the late announcement. So, double thanks to everybody for attending. So, last I saw there were 92 sign-ups, which is absolutely awesome. So, thank you very, very much indeed. We don't have any major announcement to make, apart from we have the presenters and the agenda for the next 3 Bash events set up. So that will get released soon. So we've got our ducks lined up in a row for the next 3 events anyway. So that's all good. And then the format for this event, based on the late notice and also the nature of the topic, it's going to be slightly different from normal. So we're going to have 2 brief introductory talks and then a roundtable discussion. Okay, so first of all, what I'm going to be doing is calling on Emma, and she's going to be telling us what product is. And then I'll call on Steven, and he'll be telling us what product isn't. Yeah, and then they will be joining us. Along with product people, Leela and Charlie, and we'll be having a little roundtable discussion. Okay, so in this particular format, the questions from you folks are very valuable. I mean, they're always valuable, but in this format, they're incredibly valuable. So can I just strongly encourage you to ask questions, and we'll see them come up here, and I'll make sure that as many as possible are asked. Okay, so please ask the questions. So without further ado, if I can call on Emma. Hi, Emma. And
hello, everybody.
Hi there. And if I can invite you to give our introductory talk.
Cool. Let's get started. Okay. This is where I'm now realizing that my slides aren't working with my buttons. Oh. Hold on 1 second. Oh, done. I've worked out a manual way to do this. Okay, sorry. So my name is Emma Mulholland. I'm product person at Instil. And this is a picture of me and my dog, because I did that standard pandemic thing and bought a pandemic puppy. So this is me and Sully. I've been working in product for, I don't know, maybe 10 or 15 years under different titles. So I'll cover that a bit later. And today I want to talk to you about a bit of a whistle-stop tour, like a high-level intro into what is product management. Basically starting from the premise that building products is hard, very risky and very hard. So how do we build successful products? How do we remove risk from the process of building them? And that's all about the process of product management and introducing the role of the product manager. And then a little bit about how we as product managers manage products. Okay, so let's just start with the basics. What exactly is a product? So a product creates specific value for a group of people, customers and users, and the organization that develops and provides it. This is the definition from Roman Pichler. Highly recommend him just as a guru person to go and look up around product theory in general. But the key thing two key terms that I take away from this that drives pretty much everything in product management is the concept of value and the concept of your user. In fact, I think if you were going to give us a different title, or if you wanted to rethink what product managers do, essentially we are all about the management of value. So how you create it, and then how you distribute it, I guess. And we do that through the understanding of the users of our products. And we do that through working with people to build those products. Okay, so big scary stat. I did say building products is risky and hard. So the freaky thing is that 80% of new products fail. It's just a fact. There's a huge amount of uncertainty and huge amount of risk to what we do day to day. So the key question then becomes, like, if all the huge amount of products fail, how do we actually de-risk that? How do we become the 20% that are successful? What are the tools and techniques, and what's the mindset that will actually get you to that concept of a successful product? So here's a bit of information around the reasons why startups fail from CB Insights. So the crazy thing is that 40% of startups that fail actually fail because there was no market need for the product. I mean, that just seems a bloody obvious, but it's actually not, because people have an idea, they fall in love with their idea becomes their baby, and they become too solution focused. So the key thing to take away here then is that the concept, the thing that you need to be focusing on is not your baby or your idea or the solution that you want to deliver, but the thing that actually sits behind it, which is the problem. What's the problem that you're solving? And I've got a nice example, like one of the most famous examples of a product that failed because there was just no bloody use for it, is actually Google Glass. Like this was touted as like, oh, it's going to be the next thing, and there's all this cool technology in it and all these amazing things you can do with it. And the technologists got very excited about the concept of building it. But the reality was it just didn't solve any problems. Like there was nothing, there was no core pain or problem there that it was fixing. And Google actually lost $400 million through the whole concept of Google Glass. Okay, so how do we start to build a successful product, considering it's risky and hard, and the chances are we're probably going to fail? There's three concepts that are behind a successful product, and indeed create the concept of the product team that will build the product, which is that it should be usable, viable, and feasible. Those three concepts have different skill sets and sort of mindsets behind them. So the usability would be your product designer. That's all the UX side, and that's where you're doing your prototyping and all the kind of design thinking. The technology feasible side, so that's the engineers in the team. So you can come up with like the best idea ever, or have this wonderful problem, but if you can't actually feasibly create it, there's no point. And then the third part is the viability part of it. So yes, you might have a brilliant user problem, and yes, you might have a wonderful way to fix it, but actually, if you can't do that in a commercially sensible way, like if you can't do it at a price point that you can sell it at, or at a cost, that's useful, or that hits an actual market, that people that are going to be willing to buy it, then it's just going to fall over. So these are kind of the three legs of the stool, or the three important aspects of product management. And I specifically put the word product team into this kind of Venn diagram. Sometimes this actually is the way you describe product managers, but for me, it's a whole team affair. So it's not the concept of a product manager that's creating a product or owning this or driving this. The whole team own the product, and the whole team come together to become accountable for creating this a digital product. Okay, so what is product management as kind of as a concept? Sometimes we're a little guilty of focusing very heavily on building and its technology and its IT and Scrum and Agile and all of this stuff, but actually product management as a discipline covers the whole end-to-end concept of a product and the whole life cycle of a product. So essentially, you're starting from the beginning. You're thinking about, well, what's the problem? What am I trying to solve here? And this problem links to a user, but also it links to like a business goal or a strategy, or it has to link into the business side as well. So you're looking at what's the problem, and then you're looking at, okay, well, how do I solve this problem? And that's where you're doing a lot of you're doing your user research and your rapid testing and prototyping, etc. These two steps together commonly are called discovery and framing. I'll touch on that quickly again in a little bit. And then in parallel, you move into building the product, but also thinking, I put down business, but essentially this is all the bit around the actual functionality of the product that will actually land it successfully. So, I mean, what's your distribution channel? What's the price going to be? Like, who's the market? Like, what are the market? What are your competitors like? How are you going to pitch it against that competitor? What's your USP? There's all these other concepts that sit alongside just getting the thing developed that need to be going on in parallel to make it successful. And then you've got your whole go-to-market strategy. just the whole concept of how you actually launch it and get it live and like get people to to know it, like make it like people are aware of it, and actually how they can find it and how they get it and how they use it and how they so the whole launch strategy. And then you're into your learn mode, so you're very quickly trying to work out, well, like how has the market react to this and how are people using it, and what do we want to do next, and there's a whole learn cycle. And I don't know why we're going backwards. And then critically, you're going into a whole phase of like, well, what happens next? So either your product grows and it just follows a standard product life cycle, which the digital product life cycle is the same as a physical product life cycle. You will kind of grow, mature, and eventually die like all the rest of us. Or in this learn cycle, you might be realizing, okay, so our technology is sound, but the users we were targeting were wrong and we need to pivot to a different user. Or it might be, okay, so these users are correct, but the solution isn't quite right and let's pivot to something different. So you're pivoting. Or you're part of that 80% that just kind of, die and you're not successful at all. But if you do actually kind of launch and grow, then you're into an optimization mode. And that's a completely different type of product management. So essentially, there's a whole range of like types of thinking and activities that need to happen to manage a product from its conception right through to delivery and then its day-to-day in life. Now, this whole end-to-end process is called product management. Now, what the role does in different companies, that can be up for debate, I guess. If you're in a big company, different parts of these, you might be lucky enough to have a product marketing manager, or business development team, or there might be different people that help support and do all these different things. And so product management gets shared out. But in very small companies, typically this will be to start with the CEO and over time, the product manager that will be managing this end to end. So I think it's really interesting to think about all of the things that are happening. It's not just kind of writing user stories and building things with engineers. You're thinking about everything from pricing models and marketing strategies and the whole thing end to end. Sometimes we get asked, and this might come up in the questions afterwards as well, what's the difference between a product manager and product owner and blah, blah, blah. And I think the concept of a product owner is a Scrum term. Scrum is a delivery methodology. So that one box build, that's effectively where delivery is sitting. And so it's a term that comes from that one box. Now, a product manager will cover the stuff that a product owner needs to do, but a product manager needs to be thinking about all the other things as well. Now, it could be argued, and there are theorists out there that say the product owner should be doing all of this stuff as well, the problem definition and the research and market, like all of that side. I unfortunately quite typically see that a product owner gets very much just focused into delivery, and all they're doing is kind of this backlog management, and it's a bit feature factory, and it becomes a very delivery focused role. So it's one of those things. It causes a lot of interesting conversations within the industry. Sometimes I've also seen, because product owner sounds like it's a fancy title, some companies use the term product owner to mean like the project sponsor or the senior business person, the hippo who's going to make these decisions. Kind of an interesting interpretation as well. So I guess there's no wrong and right answer. There's a lot of different views on what the terms are, but you can always bring it back to product owner is a Scrum term. That's linked to a delivery methodology, and product management as a process covers all of these things end to end. How you actually, the activities that sit under this can get implemented in many different ways. Okay, cool. Product manager, I'm just going to keep an eye on time because I should be going faster. So that does mean the product manager day to day is doing lots of different things. They have to think about everything from high level to low level, and they cover off a lot of activities. It is essentially a unicorn role. It's a generalist role. I kind of think the way that I think about it, potentially imposter syndrome, is that a product manager isn't a specialist, and they're never going to be the smartest person or skilled at a specific thing in a room, because we rely on every other specialist coming together to support us to get this product created. We kind of are Jack or Jill of all trades. We kind of know little bits of everything, a bit of a magpie. We pull in things from everything and kind of, try and get this thing happening end to end. So what does that mean? It means product managers work or think strategically and tactically. They do discovery and delivery, and they're working internally and thinking externally about their users. And this basically just means your job is crazy and no 2 days are the same. And so the thing that you have in your head on a day-to-day basis is, what is the most valuable thing I should be working on right now? Links back to that thing I said earlier about value and user are two of the core concepts that drive everything within product management. I'm going to cover this slide very fast. You'll be glad to know a number of these slides are new to this talk. So this is the first time going, and this is one of them. This is actually comes from an article on Mind the Product called "The History and Evolution of Product Management." It's by Martin Erickson. But what is kind of interesting, and I want to flag quickly, well, 2 or 3 things here, is product management isn't a new thing. It has been around for a very long time. And it's just kind of, it's evolved. But the other thing to bear in mind is that product management is actually came primarily from marketing. And there's some interesting figures I'm going to show you about reporting lines and where product management reports into that also kind of reflects that. So originally in the 1930s, Procter and Gamble, they came up with this concept that the name has now escaped me, but one of the key people at Procter and Gamble, he wrote this memo about this concept of how you should approach conceiving and selling a product. And he came up with this concept of brand men and brands in general and the creation of brands. And that kind of drove consumerism, I guess, for the next 40, 50, 60, 70 years onwards. And that is pretty much the roots of product management, because that's where we come from. That, like, a lot of what we do still links into that. And then as that was going on in parallel, Hewlett and Packard, the 2 guys from Hewlett and Packard, they actually heard a talk from this guy, and they took this theory on board and they used it within Hewlett and Packard as well. So they changed their organizational structure into the concept of divisions. So they were focusing on specific products at a time. And they also brought the user into their thinking process and all their decision, and much closer to the decision making. And that drove basically their success. They had 20% growth year on year for like 40 plus years. And that all came from that concept of, focusing on the concept of a product. And then in parallel, again, we had this concept of the Toyota product system and Kaizen and Kenshi and Genbutsu. I'm going to say that wrong, Genbutsu. These were all kind of concepts that were happening. And then that took shape to the 1990s and the 2000s, when you had product management and sort of technology coming through. So you actually had product managers before you had agile. You had product managers using kind of waterfall, and they took these theories from the original kind of product management within marketing, and they were applying them to technology. But then in 2001, you had the Agile Manifesto, and then you started the concept of this product owner role that became very delivery focused. And then kind of that evolved into product management as part of a marketing and engineering role. And then today, what has been really interesting in the last few years is the product has got to the point where it is seen as so valuable within a company that is a standalone function. So even between 2017 and 2019, there was a big shift in where reporting sat within a company. So I've been doing product, but it's been called a lot of other things for about 15 years. And when I started, I worked in IT as a business analyst, but then all my roles actually sat within marketing until the last company I worked in. I actually reported ultimately into a VP of product. But before that, product was always part of marketing. And some of my job titles that I did the job that I now consider to be product would have been like customer experience manager, web development manager, business development manager, requirements lead, all these jobs that were basically trying to understand the users, understand competitors, and pull together what product should look like. But it's really exciting that if you look at the last thing bit there, in 2017, so it's 8% of product managers reported into a product function. And by 2019, over half of product managers reported into a product function. And you can see how they've moved out of marketing and moved out of their business lines and into either standalone product, or interestingly, they kind of moving into engineering. And I guess that's where you get that overlap or confusion sometimes between product owners and product managers and what the role does. I'm actually going to pause there. I do have like general product management theory, but I think it's just too long because we've been going for over 20 minutes. So it might be good to pause there. What do we think? I'm actually going to check. I might actually do. Oh, there's Garth.
No, I was going to say, I think that's grand if you're happy to pause at that point. And there are some questions, but maybe if we leave them to the general discussion. So possibly if I can throw you out at this stage. And if I can ask Steven to come on and join us. So we've discovered what being a product manager actually is. And as we've seen, it's a very generalist role. So that means there's lots of things you can do wrong and ways you can misunderstand it. So I think, Steven, you're going to fill us in on those.
Well, indeed. Thank you. So yes, I have some slides as well. Perfect. Right on cue. So yes, Emma talks us through basically what a product manager should be. And I'm going to spend some time now talking about what it shouldn't be. So in true product management style, I'm going to start by digging into why I've selected this topic. Basically, the PM role has seen a huge surge in adoption in recent years, especially in Northern Ireland. And to go back to some of the figures that Emma showed, that would definitely support that. Some of that is because of organic adoption, some of it simply because a competitor has it. However, the mainstream adoption of Agile combined with the increase in foreign direct investment that we've seen recently has definitely also helped that as well, to bring in some of those good practices. Ultimately though, again, back to Emma's point, more and more products and companies are actually failing. So the industry is starting to realize that shiny new technology just isn't enough to achieve success. Also to that as well, unfortunately, it's very easy to poorly apply the product manager role. It can be done without any real understanding of why and carried out without any real training, both for Agile and also product. And then the third point there, from industry to industry, organization to organization, there are many interpretations of what the PM role is. The software industry as a whole has managed to come up with an impressive array of job titles in order to adapt to the changing landscape and trends. And that really brings me to the next slide here, which, again, to Emma's point, one of the longest serving roles is that of a product manager. However, it's probably one of the least understood roles, thanks to the various ways in which it's applied throughout the various Agile frameworks that we have. Scrum is perhaps one of the most popular Agile frameworks. Because of this, terms like product owner, product manager tend to get used interchangeably. Emma did cover this off, so I won't run through each of these points. But for me, it can be summarized as product owner role is a subset of responsibilities of what the product manager role is. So hopefully most of you will have worked with the PM before, but for those of you that are less familiar, I'm going to talk through some of my favorite, if for want of a better term, anti-patterns of what a product manager can hopefully avoid. Rather than just rant about this, which I do enjoy, I do also want to try and make some practical suggestions as to how we can address them. So the first one I have here is the PM serving multiple teams. It's a common issue, typically whenever organizations scale or when a product manager does a good job within one team, they can sometimes become a victim of their own success. Unfortunately, product ownership doesn't really scale quite the same way that a servant leadership role, such as a Scrum Master, would. And that can lead to inflated expectations around what that role can provide. With that, availability becomes stretched, therefore the effectiveness reduced, and therefore invariably they become a bottleneck to decision making. How do we fix that? Sometimes easier said than done, but ultimately the PM should push back and try to limit themselves to a maximum of 2 teams. Otherwise, they really will risk seeing a reduction in their performance. With that as well, they should monitor their availability across their multiple teams. And if they do notice that that starts to reduce, then you really need to sort of tackle that early on. Okay. So the next anti-pattern that I have in mind is that it's basically the inverse of what I had just described. This can happen when a team or company transitions from SAFe, for example, into Scrum, where the roles and responsibilities can differ a little bit. They can also occur whenever the two roles are split. So whenever you have both a product owner and a product manager operating within the same team, and typically that will happen whenever there's a split between the tactical and the strategic thinking. And sometimes that comes around whenever we actually don't have the expertise within one person within that team. So what that really causes is that we have no single source of truth. Teams can suffer from a case of too many cooks. Really that instills, or can instill, a lack of confidence and trust in the team for the product manager. Conflicts of interest can arise, and ultimately delayed decision making happens, which is counterproductive to the product manager there to be unblocking the team. Again, solution in theory straightforward: one product owner, product manager per team. Multiple stakeholders, obviously fine, but ultimately one person should be the key decision maker in order to remove the problems that I just described. The next one, this typically happens as sort of same sort of root cause as what I had described. Sometimes they're sort of same excuse, but the product manager's lack of availability can be caused by other anti-patterns, usually not understanding the role fully, which can lead to basically being rather counterproductive. And to extend upon that problem, really the feedback loop becomes slower, which causes a reduction in efficiencies, and in prolonged cases, it really can cripple the productivity and demotivate a team. How do you address that? Basically, make yourself available. If you do have a reduction in your time because you're spread across multiple teams, you need to look at addressing that. If you can't attend all of the ceremonies and you have to just pick one, like, make sure it's a sprint retrospective. In my opinion, it's the single most important ceremony for improving quality. The others, obviously attend them if you can, but that one for me is a must as well. So the fourth one here we have is a proxy PO or proxy PM. This can happen whenever the product manager isn't available, to my point before. In this instance, the responsibility is usually given to a department head or a team head, or in worst cases, it just defaults to the most senior person on the team. When this happens, it usually highlights a poor understanding of the role, making a dangerous assumption that the most senior person on the team is therefore qualified. Again, it leads to delayed decision making. That's very, very key in that, we want to have these efficient, quick feedback loops. And if we don't have that, it just slows down the team and you become a bottleneck. Again, this can lead to distrust and disengagement from the team as well. A solution, again, in paper, very straightforward. You really need to engage a real product owner or just fully empower the proxy that you have in place. If this isn't possible due to the skill set of the resource, then consider employing specialists or additional support, such as a BA, who can handle some of those tasks that perhaps the proxy can't or doesn't have the experience to do themselves. So if we move on to the next one, this one is probably the most common in terms of what we've seen with the various interpretations of roles, as they can differ from company to company. Scrum and Agile understanding being at the mercy of each individual, this can arise and probably is one of the most common patterns. As I mentioned before, it can lead to a mistrust within the team. If you do have a dedicated Scrum Master and a product owner, those roles and responsibilities can blur if they are poorly defined. Ultimately, for the team, that causes a confusion and really just dilute the benefits that you would get by applying frameworks such as Scrum. It's typically most often confused with the managerial role. If those responsibilities are added to the product manager, it can consume their time and ultimately just reduce the lack of focus that they have on the product itself. Solution, being a little bit flippant here, but the Scrum guide, if you're using Scrum, specifies 3 roles. They're well-defined roles. There is since going back to sort of 2000, it's a pretty mature framework now that really there shouldn't be too much blurred lines between each of the distinct roles. But beyond that, just try avoid doubling up in roles. I know companies starting out, smaller companies, have a tendency to wear multiple hats, but ultimately it just leads to a conflict of interest. And then lastly, leave your ego at the door. With the product manager role, you don't have any authority. You need to influence through leadership. You need to find other ways rather than just sort of having authority over that team. As Emma said, you've got one of the hardest jobs in technology. You have no power, no authority over the team, but you still need to lead them, and you still need to get them to buy into your product and your vision. So you do this through influence. You do this by leading by example, constantly pushing the product, making the team feel accountable, using metrics to do that, but not just by telling people to do something. So I did touch on this before, and it's similar to that availability anti-pattern in that, you know, it's quite easy to avoid this. However, for some reason, some teams, some organizations, or even just the product managers don't believe that a PM should participate in this event. I just think that's very poor thinking. It does create a us versus them thinking in terms of engineering versus product, which it's incredibly harmful. It just doesn't make any sense to have that within a cross-functional team. Again, in my mind, it's the single most important ceremony. And if you want to improve quality, everyone in that team needs to be there. The solution, I'm again being somewhat flippant, but it's very simple. You know, Scrum teams have retros. A product owner is in the Scrum team. It really is as simple as that. So this one, again, pretty common, but you'd be amazed at how often that it's not really achieved or it's ignored. If you are concerned with providing quality products, then you really need to strive towards prioritizing outcome. Unfortunately, certain situations can cause the opposite to happen, such as being under external pressure to deliver, stakeholders having perhaps too much influence, or when a PM comes from a more traditional project management background, they maybe get a little bit hung up on budgets and timelines, for example. In these situations, the development team is often pushed to take on more tasks than really is realistically possible. And really, and again, Emma touched on this, but pursuing delivery, which can be more of that product owner role, just going after the delivery, it doesn't necessarily lead to long-term product success. You might have some short-term success with that, but it's really not sustainable. In fact, often it has the adverse reaction. It tends to focus the team also on misleading metrics. I've called it velocity, vanity metrics, which tend to lead to a quantity over quality approach. Really what you want to do, it helps shift that mindset towards owning the problem, and that's what you kind of want to push. So going back to agile basics, pushing really that sort of customer-centric or incremental sort of progress towards what your goals should be, rather than just trying to get tickets across the board. Having those inspection points are useful, but the expectation should be that we're not done until the actual outcome is met, not just the output that we were focusing on in that sprint or in that quarter, for example. Success ultimately, it won't come based on whether you stayed within budget or whether you finished ahead of the deadline. It comes down to whether customers will recognize the value in your product to an extent that they will pay money for your product. So, product discovery. This one, essentially, don't let the name sort of fool you. It's by product discovery, it doesn't mean that it's just the product manager. It's the product team, not product management discovery. This is one I will hold my hand up. I'm probably guilty of most. For what I think are good intentions, not wanting to distract the team with long-term scoping of a future project that doesn't add instant value to the team. It can be very tempting to think you have the team's best sort of interest at heart by not including them. But ultimately, that is a fallacy. You will save the team a lot of time and effort by bringing them in early on, upon which at first inspection, they can assess if it's not technically feasible, viable, or even usable, which ultimately you could sort of fail quite quickly, which really should be a goal if you're working in an agile environment. You also need to remember that the vision isn't yours. Don't confuse being the voice of the customer with being the customer. So don't build features that just you want to see. You're there to support the team, remove roadblocks for them, and give them the freedom to build, not just dictate what they should build. Also to that point, you represent the customer, but most customers aren't engineers or they're not designers. It's not their job to think outside the box. If you do want innovation, that's where your team comes in. How do we get that? It's difficult. You basically need to empower your team. So you need to work with engineering, you need to work with design. You need to have a cross-functional team that will have all of the expertise there to tackle each of the individual risk areas and then also add value for each of those areas. Yes, viability, product manager responsibility mainly, but desirability or the usability, design, feasibility, and that's really the engineering. That's where they come in. That's where they will help you. You're not the expert in that area, but everyone comes together to feed into that ultimate decision-making process. So a couple more, I guess, product success, sort of anti-patterns that I want to call out here. A feature is not the same thing as a benefit. A benefit or a feature is something, is what something is, whereas a benefit is what something does. But it's more than that. Customers, they buy benefits, something that will prevent the pain for them or create a gain for them. And to that point, if your product doesn't alleviate some kind of pain or doesn't provide a gain for them, or at least address some sort of need or desire that they have, they're probably not going to buy that as a benefit. To that point, just being new, it's not a benefit. Just for having innovation for its own sake, it's not enough. If you're not actually solving a problem or adding any perceivable value, that won't work. Unless maybe if you're Apple, but the most important thing if all you can say about your product is that it's brand new, probably need to reevaluate what your sort of value proposition is for your product. So the solution here really is just to go back to thinking about the problem first, being more user-centric, and then how you get that solution to solve that problem. That will help you stay more in that benefit-creating mode. Try to think more about an MLP, so like the minimal sort of lovable product as opposed to the MVP. I don't think any product manager wants customers just to tolerate their product. The MLP will deliver the minimum, a product that needs to be actually used and loved by your product, as opposed to just the bare minimum to get it delivered. Another point that I think teams can seem to fall into if they start to sort of run out of ideas, you need to and resist adding features just for the sake of it, especially for a failing product. You need to really focus on addressing the fundamental problem of why the product is failing. Adding more features can be counterintuitive, just adds to confusion, makes the problem worse. One approach for helping you find this is maybe by using the Kano model, help you focus more on customer satisfaction. So identify what the delighters might be, what the must-haves might be, and focus in on those areas. And so very, very similar to this, users, they do not equal customers. It might sound pretty pedantic, but often your customer and user won't be the same person. The customer makes a purchase, but doesn't necessarily use your product, and the user doesn't necessarily pay for your product. This is especially true in B2B. It's also very common for a user to mistakenly and perhaps wishfully be referred to as a customer, but unless they're paying for your product, they're just your user. So why is that a problem? So it's important to address the needs and the concerns of your buyer, but for a product to be ultimately successful, it needs to add value to the user. They're two distinct there are two distinct personas that you will need to consider. It's easy to mix them up. They can be used interchangeably, especially whenever you don't necessarily understand the subtle differences. Solution for that, you do need to spend time to identify the various user personas involved, understand what the relationship are to each other and also to what your product, and then tailor your approach accordingly. So that might reflect different messaging, it might be a different value proposition, might be a different customer or user experience, but ultimately it needs to be tailored towards if you do have that split between user and customer. Also, I would call out definitely, become best friends with your sales and marketing and your supports team. They will have first-hand experience engaging with both your buyers and your users, and they will be able to help you out in terms of figuring out what those differences are. Okay, and lastly, this is something actually that Emma touched on just towards the end of her talk. It's not so much an anti-pattern for an individual product manager, but more for the company itself. When the product function reports into the CTO, in my opinion, this should be seen as a bit of a bad smell and a sign to look out for. It potentially doesn't bode well for your career as a PM if you wanted to focusing purely on product. Best case, this can typically be caused by a lack of understanding of the role itself. Worst case, it's a lack of respect for the role. Why? Would an engineer report to marketing, or would HR report to the CTO? I think it's pretty safe to say no. In which case, why would you want a product manager to report to anyone but a CPO? A dedicated product function. Companies thrive or fail based on product performance. Technology is becoming fairly ubiquitous and its competitive advantage is lessening. Handicapping your product development is therefore nothing short of company suicide if you do not set them up for success. PMs tend to sit in that sort of center of, as Emma said, sort of the technology, the business, and the user. By reporting to an engineering function, it creates an impression of bias against the business and the user. Regardless if that's true, that's the impression that it puts out, at least internally. On a more practical level, the CTO, they just can't possibly keep up with all the duties of both the engineering and a product function. Product management body of knowledge is rapidly evolving. It has been around for a long, long time, but with its sort of recent surge in interest, certainly in the UK, there's an array of resources and tools now available. This is hard for any dedicated product function to ensure they're up to date and to support their PMs, but it's virtually impossible to do that for two distinct functions. So placing a product manager basically under that engineering function, it ultimately can lead to transforming a product manager into a technical product manager, which in my mind, it's a nice way of saying you're a feature order taker for the engineering team and you're not really being customer focused. The solution to this is relatively simple. Acknowledge product as the separate dedicated function that it is, and you hire a CPO, which is a peer to the CTO. That basically what that does, it represents an acknowledgement of the product management as a strategic driver for the growth of the product and the growth of the company, and also sort of acknowledges it as being just as important as the other functions. But that is me, and do let me know if I've missed anything out or if you have any questions.
Excellent, brilliant. So thank you so much. That's clarified a lot of things for me. So if we can get rid of your desktop, and if I can ask Emma, Leela, and Charlie to join us as well, and if we can have a little bit of a roundtable discussion, yeah. So I've got some questions here, but what I'm trying to do is batch them up into general themes, that we can discuss. So first of all, why are we here? Okay, so I think this was touched on a couple of times before, but in the past year or two, product management has suddenly become like a huge hot topic, and what has propelled it to the forefront, So, well, one thing that I think may be true, and I'd be interested to see what you think, is there are times in the IT industry when we're doing a lot of lift and shifting. We're moving stuff to the web, we're moving stuff to mobile, we're moving stuff to tablets, we're moving stuff to the cloud. But have we moved out of a lift and shift era, and are we in an era now where it's all about good ideas? And the winning companies are going to be the companies with good product. Now that everybody has a mobile presence and everybody knows how the web works, and everybody can use the cloud and so on. So is it all about an era where the best ideas win? And is that why product management is suddenly so important? So anybody want to go first on that?
I'll go first because it sort of touches on a point that I just made recently. I think product management has been around for a long time, and I think just the fact that the most successful businesses and the most successful products have applied product management, and those that haven't perhaps haven't succeeded as well. Technology is becoming less and less of a competitive advantage, and therefore I think the catching up to that is that the realization that they need to think beyond just the recent shiny new technology and embrace being a bit more customer centric or a bit more product focused.
Cool.
Yeah, I can pick up on that if you like. I would agree with the points. I think in areas where there are a lot of competing products, like in enterprise software and so on, I think that the lift and shift has now evolved into trying to outdo each other, and people are trying to be creative, if you like, around the user experience. And I think we've reached the point maybe where people are going too far and doing form over function. A product supplier now is adding in more dashboards, more widgets, more bells and whistles, without actually asking if it's what the users want. And by doing that, they're now in danger of making the product less useful and actually less desirable. So it's really not achieving what they want to at all. I think that creativity stuff and the creative thinking has got a massive part to play in businesses generally, transforming services, processes, as well as products. So I think it has a space. And yet there's a huge amount of work needs to be done about ideas, generating ideas. And I think it was Emma said, validating ideas before you sort of go headlong into implementing them.
I really felt that point about a feature isn't a benefit. I really felt that in my water, as Granny might have said. It's like, yeah. But I mean, I recognize that, but we even see that in training. I mean, whenever I'm advising people who are new to the training business, I always say, look, if the delivery is going badly, for goodness sake, don't try and throw in more topics and claim that more was covered and so on. You'll just make people angry and more confused. Slow down, spend more time on the topics that are giving people problems, and they'll thank you for it in the long run. So definitely the feature isn't a benefit is a thing. Anybody else want to speak on that one before we move on, or? Nope. Cool. I think one of the other things that was touched on there was the interaction between product management and agile, and this is a very interesting one for me because I was never a product manager, but I was involved in the requirements rule, and I'm a huge fan of DDD and so on, and it's always occurred to me that if I was in the requirements rule or the PO rule or whatever, and I was doing 2-week iterations, that would terrify me because I wouldn't have the percolation time to actually feel that I was getting my DDD right and my understanding of the client right and the ubiquitous language or whatever terminology you want to use. So I can see how the relationship between agile software methods and product management could be seriously two-edged. So do you want to speak to what you think are the main benefits and the main drawback?
Emma.
I'll say one thing quickly, and I'll pass over to Leela. That you said that might reassure someone who'd be scared of the 2-week sprint thing. One of the the core purposes of the product manager is to have very serious domain knowledge on their area and a very solid understanding of their users. So although you're doing these kind of sprints, these sort of short delivery methods, they're kind of to work out your assumptions around like one problem or one small thing that you're testing. But those tests or assumptions or hypotheses are also based on a whole background or like very solid knowledge that you've built up over time. I think Marty Kagan was saying that when a product manager first joins a team or first, is first looking after a product, it takes them 3 months spending a couple of hours a day getting very, very solidly comfortable with their domain and their user. And if they can't do that, then they are pretty much useless, because that's the thing that they bring to the team. So that gives you the confidence, I guess, to then do that kind of iterative cycle thing. I will pass over to Leela to see what comment you had for it.
I'm just about to completely contradict there. Whenever you were saying about like having the 2 weeks to percolate and how that's quite intimidating, I'm of the strong belief that you will never 100% know anything. You won't really know the user. You won't really know if the idea is good, if what you're currently doing is good. And I think the role of the product manager is to obviously test their assumptions, get all that feedback, but really be the person who is able to pivot. So many people get so attached to the work that they do, while product managers, I think having that insecurity allows the pivot to just move and be like, well, I was wrong. Let's test if this works. So
yeah. So that,
in love with the problem, not the solution. Sorry.
Yeah. So yes, it's then follow-on question then, I suppose. So given that, what should the skill set and the background of a product manager be, and what preparation should they have done before that they get involved with an agile team? I mean, does a product manager need to be technical, or do they need to be coming from the same area of business as the product is in, or what ramp up period should they do before they consider themselves ready to engage with the role on a particular project?
I'll go first as a.
Yep.
I'll just have a very, very quick point. I do have a technical background, and so it's tempting to be biased with this, but no, absolutely not. The PM does not need to be technical. Does it help? It depends on the product that you're working on, but there's a lot of transferable skills that you can use in your product. The domain knowledge or the industry that you're in can be picked up relatively easily compared to the skills of a product manager that you need. So it doesn't really matter what background you come from, in my opinion.
Now I've got them come off mute. I'll try again at answering your question. I again, picking up I think what Steven was saying, you need to have a good skill set. You need to know the methodologies, the tools, the techniques for product management or for any kind of management. But I think a critical thing for me is actually goes against what Emma was saying. That I think you need to be able to bring naivety. If you can't bring naivety into the discussion about the domain, then you can't ask the stupid questions. And if you can't ask the stupid questions, then you're going to do things the way they've always been done, because that's your background. You need to be able to challenge the way things are operating today and say, there might be another perspective on this. And you need to see different perspectives if you're going to do product development, if you're not just going to be another Me Too, if you're actually going to come out with something truly innovative.
Cool. So in the same way that, no two teams would ever do agile exactly the same way, would no two teams ever do product the same way?
I don't think they should. I think any methodology, I hate agile with a big A, and a product management with a big P and M. It's agile is a set of things that might be useful in your scenario, or they might not be. The same with waterfall, same with Prince 2, all of those different approaches, jobs to be done, whatever it is. I think you should be really kind of ripping those things apart and saying what aspect of it is useful in the scenario that I've got and with the team that I've got. And then you concoct your own methodology or own approach, which is appropriate to the task in hand and appropriate to the team. And that's not easy, but it's much better than doing stuff because Agile tells you should.
Yeah, I'd add to that, or quickly I'll pass. Do you want to go first this time? No, I'd kind of just quickly agree, and I'd say the times when I've been training people, everyone comes like desperate to learn what is the thing I need to do to be successful. What's the thing that's going to solve all my problems? And what we typically have to say is there's no silver bullet. It's just hard, and it's just experimenting and trying and being reflective and using retros and kind of being self-aware and kind of critically reflective enough, and then to work out what to do next. So I just love all the stuff that kind of the Charlie's been saying. There is no silver bullet, and stay on top of all the different. There's so many things coming out, ideas and different ways of doing things. So it's just continuously evolving. So you kind of, I guess, build up experience as well from trying different things. But then the same thing's never going to work twice as well. So you've got to be humble about that. I'll pass over to Leela.
I was just going to follow up on the agile with a capital A. Agile is an attitude, not a set of instructions. It's an approach to how you do everything, not something that I think everyone can conform to. And that's why there is such variation across all different stages of development and different sizes of teams. I actually wanted to come back to the product manager experience and your background, because I was an artist, I was an illustrator, and I kind of fell sideways into software, which has been amazing, but having a really open mind is essential to being a product manager. And like Charlie was saying, asking the stupid questions. I mean, I was working with these amazing developers and all this language that I didn't understand, but I was able to ask the questions, and having those interactions and that understanding really helped with stakeholder engagement and even with the customer, and being able to explain what it is that this grand idea was so important. So I think like the product manager is your context for everything. You need to understand what different members of your team are saying, and you need to understand what your customer is asking for, and you need to understand, what the business wants from all of this. Like you are the water. Yeah.
Yeah, no, love that. I always like the Bruce Lee analogy that it's all a finger pointing. Every agile principle and practice and so on is supposed to be directing your attention towards a particular thing, and it's more important to be heading towards the moon than it is to be looking at the finger. So if something doesn't work for you, you replace it, but you try and keep going in the direction that you were being pointed. So yeah, absolutely.
Sorry, can I pick up on that, Garth? Sorry, about the vision. I mean, it's something I don't think was touched on. Is having a product vision, a very, very clear, big, hairy, audacious goal, if you like, that you want that product to get to. And it's the same with any form of innovation. You need that guiding star to be out there to keep you right. Because you do have to pivot, you have to change your mind, and you have to do different things. And if you don't have a clear guiding star or a vision of where you want to get to, you end up going in completely the opposite direction, and then you're just all over the place. So I think one of the things that is rarely talked about, but you have to have a product vision, very, very clearly defined, very audacious, something to really aim for, and that will keep you right. That's your guide. Sorry, I cut across you.
Yeah, no. I think you've just answered my next question. So what I was going to say was, in relation to metrics and so on, how do you actually measure success? Because, for example, I know that whenever I'm doing agile coaching, a big problem that teams often have is they say, look, we have a PO, but the product that we're producing, it's being sold to many different clients, and those clients have different, sometimes adversarial, aspirations, and we aren't really sure what counts as success. We know a feature might work, but to use your terminology, we don't know if that feature is a benefit or if it's only gone down well with one set of clients. So is that a problem that a product manager is there to solve or there to help solve, or is that why you just need a clear vision, and should you just stick to the vision no matter what, or should you alter the vision? Or I'm just going to pull the pin on that hand grenade and just throw it in there and see what everybody says.
Yeah, I was agreeing with what Charlie was saying about having the larger vision, and something that I usually would kind of present to people is it's much easier to break the mountain down to the boulders than to build the boulders up to the mountain. So having that kind of broad vision, but as far as knowing if something is going to be successful, you don't really know until it's out there and you're testing it with people. So testing is like such an important part of all the different stages, and just really digging in and doing the discovery. So
cool. So then if a product was going to be like sold across many markets and so on, what would people recommend as the best way to test it?
I'm gonna go to big market people.
with a cross section of the potential users. I mean, it's creating personas, understanding who your customer actually is. I mean, the biggest thing biggest failing that a lot of startups would have, and you can think of a new product development effectively as an internal startup within the company. One of the big problems is that the person that came up with the idea is the person that then gets to implement it. And it gets and we've all been there. I can put my hand up saying I've been there. You get so self-absorbed that what you produced is just fantastic, and why wouldn't anybody need it? Yeah. You've missed the important step of saying, well, does anybody actually want it? Does anybody agree with me? So way before you get into the really expensive bits of developing and deploying solutions, you need to validate the concept. So you need to know that you're working within a real opportunity, generate ideas around that, and then validate those ideas as concepts before you even get to anywhere near cutting code.
Yeah, and I think what I'd say to tail that up, I guess, as well, or wrap that up, is to keep yourself honest, but use measures. So metrics are useful as long as you've got the right ones. So you need to spend some time really thinking, I mean, what is the measure that will show if this is valid or invalid, or what's the measure of success, and then holding yourself true to those. It's very easy to bias yourself, and as soon as you hear one person, you test something and one person likes it, you automatically are like, oh, that's invalidated. But actually kind of creating hard measures and hard, success factors, criteria for your experiments, and sticking to them is critical.
Absolutely.
I actually have one more thing to add then. You learn more from failures than successes. Is the big one. So like with the testing, but I'm going to say like the bad thing you're not supposed to say, but you can learn a lot from other people's failures. So research is so essential, and I know it's probably easier with video games because people are brutally honest in comments about, hey, this feature was useless, why is this here, this doesn't work. So just doing due diligence and researching can kind of help with that.
Yep.
And that comment about people are brutally honest. I mean, that's another thing that generally, if you have a concept or an idea that you want validated by people, so many times you'd hear people saying, well, what do you think? Do you like it? You're not asking for a critique at that point. You're asking for affirmation that you were right to drop out of the day job and do something different. You need to ask people what you want from them. What have I got wrong on this? What have I missed? What should I be adding to this? If you don't ask for a critique, you will just get somebody nodding and saying, well done. And that's no use to you.
Yeah. And it's a terrible trap to fall into. Whenever I'm coaching developers, I always ask, and I put up both my hands to this, how many of you have ever added a feature to a system on the basis that this is what the user wants when they finally wake up and realize what it is that we're trying to achieve here, So I think, everybody's been guilty of that at least once, I think you mentioned something really interesting there, Leela, which was the area of game development, So how would you say that product management in the gaming industry is different from other areas of IT?
I can only really attest to Northern Ireland, which is rapidly growing at the moment, but is still fairly new. Product management, and this is terminology as well, and I think such an important part of being a product manager is to be able to pivot on terminology, because I say product manager and I just get blank stares. It doesn't really exist. So there's a big challenge there in trying to teach product to people who have no relation to it at all. And obviously, like, it's a more creative, no, sorry, that sounds awful. Software, very, very creative. Video games, whole other ballgame. Because it's really got that artist mentality of, I am making this thing because I want to make it, and trying to teach them, well, you need to understand your user base is a big challenge. But yeah, the main one is terminology. I'll end up talking for ages if you ask me too many questions here.
I think you've just volunteered to give a separate talk there. Well done.
Maybe.
Excellent. So then, kind of related to that, if you had a team, a software team, and they wanted to adopt a kind of product mindset, but they didn't have anybody with the right expertise immediately available, what would you recommend that they do?
Workshops. Oh, always workshops. Workshops are the key to life. They're everything. And that comes back to product is purpose and its context. Whenever you set up a workshop and exercises to involve your team in the thinking process of why different things are going to exist and why we're going to do different things, I think that is the best way to get people on board with product. Is just involving them, incorporating your teams. There's too much division. Of course, this is coming from the privilege of working with small teams and lots of hats on a few people, so I can't really say too much for the larger structures. So. Yeah.
So then I think that leads us on to a good next question for everybody, which is how do you feel with scalability, or how do you cope with scalability? Because there are lots of things, lots of principles and workshops and so on that will work with small teams. But whenever you're working with big products, big endeavors, responsibilities split across multiple teams and so on, what's the best way to cope with scaling to prevent the product vision fragmenting? Yeah.
So it's a big cliche, but eat the elephant one bite at a time. Start off small. And have an impact and build your own justification for doing more of this, as you go along. Would be my one-liner.
Cool. Anybody else?
I don't think we treat that much differently. You scale the teams up if you can, of course, but to the anti-patterns that I mentioned before, you try not to break them. You don't have more than one PM per team. You don't have one PM running across all of them. Of course, that requires more resources, but if you're going to scale, you've obviously got you've got the fact that you might have those resources that need to be asked upon. There's methodologies about SAFe, and not a massive fan personally, but there's other agile frameworks that you can apply. I think communication is just the key. It's pretty simple answer, but I think just at scale, communications is the thing that's going to be the stumbling block.
Cool.
I've one or two things I'll add if we have time, Garth, or are we moving on to the next question?
All good. Yeah, no, all good. Yeah.
I'd say creating mechanisms to align people but empower them simultaneously. So you could have something like OKRs, but there are other methods and frameworks available. But essentially, if you have a very strong, to Charlie's point, vision, so the whole company understands where you're going, and you have some very strong goals, and the whole company has a consistent set of measures of success and consistently understands who the users are, then I think you can scale more easily, because if you can split them into areas where people are empowered to own their own areas, but they know what they're trying to achieve and the direction they're heading in, then that can work. And from a product management organization structure, you can kind of scale up so that you have like the appropriate roles, and they empower their teams and their product managers by splitting the work up in appropriate ways. So you don't go right, you're the back end and you're the front end, but actually splitting them into appropriate products, as opposed to maybe features or maybe things that aren't actually like a holistic area in its own right. So it's all about kind of setting the framework to empower people to do things, and then the org structure, I guess, to support it. I won't mention or talk about the SAFe thing. It's too controversial. I've been there and done that, and I'm not overly a fan, but I know that could cause conversations in its own right.
Yeah, that seems to be the general impression. But what we cannot speak of, we must pass over in silence. Yes, let's move on. So we're Charlie, go for it. Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say one other thing on that front in terms of getting going is to make sure you get buy-in from the top. If you're doing something which is a bit risky, it may not work, it may work, it might sell, it might not sell, and you want to spend some time on it. If you don't have buy-in from the top, then it's going to be an uphill battle constantly, because you're going to have to justify and explain why you're not getting a return on investment yet. You need somebody at the top who understands that this is risky. You may not see a return on investment for 12 months or 18 months, and they're not saying, where's this month's targets? Where's next quarter's figures? You need to have someone who can get that. If they don't get it, then you're really in for a hard battle.
Cool.
I just want to add for the smaller teams, and especially those who are wearing multiple hats, the best advice that I usually give is to trust in your team and to regularly check that everyone has the same understanding, that they're all kind of united in that vision. I've heard some very funny stories about language terminology, and people had worked together for 10 years on a strategy game, and after those 10 years they were asked, what does strategy mean? And they gave two completely different definitions. And it really is just communicating, but trusting that people understand what you need them to do, because otherwise it'll just dead stop the team.
Yep, very good. Grant, we're well past the hour, and I've only got 2 questions left, so let's do those, and then unless more come through on the stream, we'll call it a day. So one thing I noticed that was mentioned a few times was the idea of retrospectives, and it kind of made me aware that as somebody from a development background, I probably think of them the wrong way, because whenever I think about retrospectives, I think about technical retrospectives, and loudly making the point that everybody else is wrong because they're not using my coding conventions and my preferred IDE plugins, So what should a retrospective be from a product point of view, and how should it be run correctly, and what would be the advice you would give there? Go for it.
Workshops. Workshops. So I actually have been doing workshops with trainee groups now coming into the games industry, and especially now that everything's remote and we have Mural and other things like Miro, and anonymity for people to give honest feedback, like never abusive, never cruel, but to be really honest about, let's say the last 2 weeks of work, having exercises and that kind of loose structure that allows people to be honest and then to creatively solve their own problems. I think that's how retrospectives should be done. I think there's too much focus on agendas and structures and matching this idea of how professional is supposed to work. So
Cool.
Maybe I'm too converted by games.
That sounds good. Anybody else?
I don't really I know the Scrum Guide's quite prescriptive about all the various ceremonies, but I don't really think it needs to be that prescriptive. It just, you do whatever suits your team or suits your product, and whatever works for you. There is countless formats to apply, and I think the one thing that I would mention is that you should every so often change those up and experiment with different formats, because what you don't want is the retro to become a chore or a burden for the team. That's the absolute opposite of what it's meant to be. But to your point, Garth, I think it should be team focused rather than technically focused. I think there's other ceremonies that could maybe lend itself well to that, like the stand-up or the grooming sessions. Were technical discussions, but I think it's about the team. So, but with that in mind, if the team want to discuss technical topics, then that's what they discuss.
Well, would you ever have both? Would you ever have like a technical retrospective where people discussed, the minutiae of the developer tools and libraries and frameworks, and then like a product retrospective where we discussed, are we on course to the vision and how are we communicating, and is that wrong? Or, would you have those as 2 different events ever?
And the team dictate what they talk about. Like, it's not the product manager saying we're going to talk about product today, or we're not talking about technical aspects today. It's a open forum to discuss whatever anyone wants to discuss. That sounds pretty wishy-washy, but it's It's that simple.
Cool. No, very good. Grand. Excellent. So I don't see anything else on the inputs I'm looking at. So let me ask one final question and put each of you on the spot. So if there's one thing you wanted people to know about product management, what would it be? You know, so if there was only one and only one thing you could put in every person's head in every IT company in Belfast, you know, what would that fact be? So I'll ask for volunteers. Anybody want to go first? Yay! Thank you, Charlie.
I'll go first so that nobody can steal mine or say it before I get a chance to say it. But it would be don't waste your time developing stuff that people don't want. Make sure you validate your concept before you get into that. That would be the one thing.
Absolutely. Yeah. Very good.
Very good, Stephen.
Every team could do with a product manager.
Cool.
Oh, I think mine would be get into the habit of capturing all assumptions. Like every time you think about something, try and understand your own assumptions, because it's something you can kind of fall out of the habit of, and you maybe did only every so often, but it should be consistently at all times, so that you can always ensure you understand the thought process behind things.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Very good. And Leela, I think you're on the spot then.
Purpose. Just, understand your purpose, the purpose of the product, the purpose of a meeting, the purpose of everything that you're doing. Doesn't need to be done, and why does it need to be done are so important to be able to answer. So purpose is the main product thing, and I'm doing too many P's. So
yep,
product is hard. Okay.
Excellent, and I think that's a perfect item to end on. So I don't see any other questions. So if I can dismiss all of you at this point, with thanks. So thank you all for your input. I think that was a great discussion. Very good. Yeah. And as ever, if I can say thank you to the organizers. So thanks to Zara and Ryan and Aaron, who has stepped in at late notice and managed all the StreamYard for us in the background. So cheers, mate. Thank you very much indeed. So I hope you found that useful. We'll be releasing the details of the next 2 or possibly the next 3 events in a week or so. Otherwise, thank you so much for attending, and hope to see you next time. Thank you very much indeed. Cheers.